Brandon Aiyuk recently did an interview with Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco, and really, for the first time this offseason, really made it seem like he doesn't have a beef with the Niners. He was talking business. He's talking about his representatives, talking to the Niners, that they're having professional conversations. Really made it seem like he's probably going to re-sign the way Debo did, Fred Warner did, George Kittle did. Was that the impression you got? What do you take of the Brandon Aiyuk saga?
Well, the biggest phrase was, and I was there today, so I mean, it's like you're there at the facility working out. I
Yeah.
think it pretty much shows your intention, right, is to get a deal done. And I think the Niners want to get a deal done, but it's they clearly have given themselves. I would say this, just from looking at all the indications from the outside world, they have, they're negotiating hard here. I mean, they're negotiating hard. Why? Because they got a quarterback they think they're going to have to pay $40 to $50 million, and they've got a price tag on Aiyuk. And if Aiyuk comes in, in and around their price tag, a little over, a little under, I think he's going to stick. If he gets to a certain number, I think they're going to bail. And the reason I think that is that they've worked out J.C. Latham. They've worked out Fuguisi or Fuaga, I should say, Talieisi Fuaga. They've worked out the LSU receiver who's going in the middle of the first round. So they've given themselves, they've taken a look at middle of the round receivers, and then they sent a huge contingent to Western Kentucky for Malachi Corley. I would not be surprised if if they decided to trade Aiyuk, get J.C. Latham, and use 31 on Corley.
Yeah, I could see that happening. I'm not sure that a team would necessarily trade that much for Brandon Aiyuk right now, considering how good the draft class is for wide receivers. But if the Niners could get a top 20 pick for him, they might. It just seems like the momentum is going in the direction of them re-signing him. And, I mean, John Lynch was very measured. You know what I mean? Hey, we could give him, he could play out the 5th-year option. We know there's all kind of things that could happen. They've been ruthless with contracts this offseason, just ask Eric Armstead. But it sounds to me like Brandon Aiyuk expects to be here at the end of the day. And it also, it seems like he keeps saying he did everything the right way. I think he's more invested in this team than maybe even Debo. Like, Debo is the one that said, I don't want to be here. Trade me. I don't want to be in this team. I don't want to be out here. He came back. But Aiyuk is a West Coast guy. Aiyuk practices really hard. Aiyuk should have been the captain this year, not Debo. Like, that's, to me, they almost have to bring him back. He's a big part of their culture. You're there at practices. He's the one who sets the tone in May, in June. He does.
He's just a better player too. I mean, he's got a better future. He's got more games in his future than Debo. He's the better route runner. I mean, he's the best. If right now, look at next year's weapons. Put them all on paper. Who's their best weapon on paper? I would say it's Aiyuk, because CMC is coming off of a really, busy year where he touched the ball a lot. So I think it's Aiyuk. So you can get rid of your best weapon. Doesn't seem like it makes sense.
Also, how could you get rid of Brandon Aiyuk when you re-signed Debo? Doesn't make any sense. Like, Debo had a good resume. He had an all-pro season, but he also had a down season. He only had one really great season. And he was a hybrid player. You were paying him for a lot of what he could do as a running back, and you gave him almost $24 million a year, but Brandon Aiyuk didn't prove himself. That doesn't seem consistent at all. It seems like once you rewarded Debo, you got to bring back Brandon Aiyuk.
Well, and then look at what
unless he only wants $30 million and above, which I don't see happening. Sorry.
I mean, there's always a cutoff point, right? They got their budget. Parag's their negotiator. They're pretty tough. We just saw what they did to Eric Armstead.
Yeah.
They're ruthless on some levels, but the receiver that means the most to your quarterback is Aiyuk, and you love your quarterback, and the whole off-season's theme should be about bolstering the group around your quarterback. So build a fortress in front of him and make sure you re-sign his top receiver. If you start the the Brock Purdy era by letting go of his number one target, who he looks for on in cutting routes. I don't know. That seems like you're not really doing best by Brock either.
Right. Like if he has a down season and you trade Aiyuk, how do you not blame yourself?
Yeah, I mean, and
Right?
Aiyuk special. I mean, Aiyuk.
Yeah.
Brock lives off the in cutting route. Who's the receiver that you have that runs that route to near perfection? It's Aiyuk. Who's the guy that I mean, think about all the moments of the season this year when Brock got into a pickle or whatever, fourth quarter against Cleveland, 3 in a row, wasn't it, to Aiyuk? So
Seattle.
It's like, yeah, I mean,
for the win.
yeah.
Yeah.
Aiyuk's his guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think he knows it.
It would take a good offer to get Aiyuk.
But I think the Niners need to understand that. It's one thing to say, Eric Armstead, you're almost 31 years old. You have plantar fasciitis. It's not going away. We don't really want you anymore. That's fair. But what are you going to say to Brandon Aiyuk? Boy, you're 25, 26, getting kind of old. You haven't missed a game in a long time. You're really tough over the middle, and you go deep, and you block. Ooh, geez, you're just
biggest play.
You were in the doghouse 3 years ago. Like, what are you gonna say?
Biggest play of the Super Bowl. You beat Snead like a drum, and your quarterback didn't have any time to find you. You know what I mean?
He's pretty much impeccable. There's nothing you can say about him on the field, off the field, on games, in practice. He should be a captain and a foundational player for this team. He really should be. Trading him probably would be as bad of an idea as trading Buckner. He's that kind of a foundational piece. He's bigger than just what he does in the box score. He sets the tone for the whole organization.
To me, you can't. The one thing though that we haven't touched on is, okay, all this is true, and you can't really have $60 million of wide
receiver. Yeah.
So
who's the one really making too much money?
Yeah, it's Debo.
It's Debo. So that's the conversation you have to have. And I know you can't trade him now and create cap space, but there are things you can do after June 1st or next year. So maybe they'll have this very expensive wide receiver room for 1 year because Brock hasn't gotten extended yet. And they'll chalk it up to, well, we're not paying a quarterback. So we can spend $60 million on a wide receiver room for 1 year, but not for 2. This might be an anomaly for 1 year. And, this might be Debo's last year on the team.
Well, and then don't discount that if everything goes their way, they get all the players they want to get. Maybe they get a Malachi Corley. They could do the unthinkable, which is the best cap move, which would be to deal Debo this year after June 1st. They could do that. There is some savings that could happen. It just doesn't make sense for competitive reasons unless you feel like you've got a hell of a receiver room. So we'll see what they do receiver wise in the draft or in free agency the rest of the way. There's still some players out there. They've worked out a number of receivers. Who knows? Maybe the draft breaks right and they get a receiver they love. Maybe they get a couple of receivers they love and they do the unthinkable and they trade Debo after June 1st. Because they'll get more after June 1st than they will next year.
Yeah, one way or another, this could be the end of the road for Debo Samuel with the Niners. Either this year or next year, they could trade him. And probably they should because, look at the hard stance they took with Eric Armstead, who we're going to talk about next. Yeah. Sorry, dude. You're getting old. You're making way too much money. We can't justify paying you $28 million in the cap. What about Debo? He's not 30 yet, but he does miss time. Fair is fair. They might have to do that with him eventually too.
Well, we talked about it. Brock, you're going to pay your quarterback, $50 million instead of $1 million.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be $49 million worth of players leaving because this is a cap sport and it's a hard cap. It's not one of these soft caps you can maneuver around. So who's that $50 million? We know it's Eric Armstead. It's probably Juice. Might be Debo. It's got to be. You can go to spottrack.com, look up 49ers, look at all the top guys they have at the top of the payroll. 4 or 5 of those guys are going to be gone. Whether it's this year preparing for Brock's deal or if it's next year, reacting to Brock's deal, there's going to be some guys. There's going to be a bloodletting of guys who make big money on this roster.
Irfan Mirza says, did you guys see the Aiyuk interview last night? Yeah, we're talking about that.
I did.
What was your takeaway from what he said?
Well, I mean, I just feel like he doesn't want. He's choosing his words carefully. You only do that if you want to stay. I think ultimately he wants to stay, but Parag's a really tough negotiator, and if he doesn't get somewhere in the neighborhood of his price, as he said, he's gonna. What do you use his fingers? He's gonna be walking.
Yeah, that's fair, and it's fair for him to take a hard stance now. It just seems like when you compare it to what happened between the Niners and Deebo Samuel, it seems much better. Aiyuk is here. He's not hanging out in Miami, trying like daring the Niners to get rid of him. He's here in the building saying it only makes sense for you to reward someone like me. I've done everything right. And he's right. And I expect that they will. He's like the Fred Warner of the offense.
And there's the more you dig deep, the more you realize, man, Shanahan and Lynch love that player. You know what I mean? Shanahan and Lynch knew. Yeah, but they loved him in the draft. You saw Shanahan, at his home with his children, cheering, jumping up and down, clapping. Then you research. I think Lynch has some relationship with his agent. Obviously, he's got a relationship with Herm Edwards, who was his college coach. They handpicked and loved Aiyuk, and he's fulfilled that vision. And so the last thing they want to do is let him go. But there's Parag, and they'll play this good cop, bad cop thing. And they do want to, they're not going to just pay him an absurd sum. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think they'll get it done. I do.
Yeah, I think they'll get it done. If they gave Deebo Samuel $24 million a year 2 years ago, they seem like they should be open to paying Brandon Aiyuk 26, 27, 28. He's worth it. And he's better than Deebo Samuel. They clearly don't want to take weapons away from Brock Purdy, and they can work it out down the line when it comes vis-a-vis Deebo, not necessarily Brandon Aiyuk.